Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump warns Iran on stopping its nuclear efforts as massive armada headed to Iran hopes it comes to table and makes a deal. The US is also launching multi-day air drills in the Middle East, deploying a carrier-led armada as tension rises with Iran, while Washington signals both military readiness and openness to talks. UN warns of widespread misery for Palestinians as it urges Israel to fully reopen the Rafah crossing. This as Israeli airstrike artillery shelling continue to pound Gaza. As Western powers crack down on migrants, Spain to give 500,000 undocumented people legal status, pointing to a positive impact of migration. Man sprays US lawmaker Ilhan Omar with liquid, disrupting Minnesota event. Omar unhurt continued town hall. Police arrest the man for third-degree assault. According to SDF fighters and media reports, Russia has begun withdrawing troops and equipment from positions in northeastern Syria, including a base near Kamishli airport. However, no official confirmation has been issued by the government for now. According to Syrian media reports, President Trump held a lengthy phone call with Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara, and they reiterated the importance of diplomacy amid heightened tension with Iran. Amazon cuts 16,000 jobs globally to reverse pandemic-era hiring amid AI push, marking the online retailer's second round of layoffs in the last 3 months. All right, viewers, on to the top focus now. French President Emmanuel Macron has reaffirmed his support for a stronger NATO engagement in the Arctic during a working lunch at the Élysée Palace. Macron met with the Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen and Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen to discuss security and strategic challenges in the region. During the meeting, Macron said France is ready to join efforts to increase NATO's presence and cooperation in the Arctic, a region gaining importance due to geopolitical tension and climate change. The talks highlighted a growing concern among European allies over stability and security in the far north. The meeting signals France's willingness to play a more active role alongside NATO partners in addressing emerging Arctic challenges. Let's listen in.
Face à la posture russe dans le Grand Nord, à la présence économique de la Chine, aux conséquences stratégiques de ce rapprochement, nous partageons la nécessité de renforcer notre posture de défense dans l'Arctique. Plusieurs États européens, dont la France, ont commencé à le faire dans le cadre des exercices conjoints dits Arctic Endurance, à la demande du Danemark. Et nous soutenons aussi un engagement accru de l'OTAN dans l'Arctique à travers la création d'une activité de vigilance renforcée. Et nous sommes prêts à nous y joindre.
And thank you for standing up for the fundamental values we share and where we cannot compromise. Democracy, sovereignty, the right of every country to choose its own future.
Joining me now is Raymond Vickery, who's international affairs expert, American attorney, and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Joins us from Washington, D.C. Mr. Vickery, thanks very much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on NewsX World. Firstly, where does Trump stand right now as far as Greenland's annexation is concerned? No claims, no recent remarks have come out ever since Europe has upped its ante on the Trump administration. The concern has now really shifted to Arctic security, the conversation, than Trump's bid to acquire Greenland.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It seems clear that in order to wage peace like you wage war, you've got to have a strategy, you got to have partners, you got to have principles, and you have to have leadership. What has happened is with President Trump and his administration, the leadership position in waging peace in Europe vis-a-vis the invasion from Russia into Ukraine and really across the world has been abdicated. And so what is happening is that Prime Minister Macron with the prime ministers of Denmark and Greenland have said, President Macron have said that they are going to take up the leadership role or try to fill the gap which has been created by President Trump saying it's my way or the highway and reverting back to a 19th century view of the world in which the United States would try to build its empire throughout the Western Hemisphere, be that Greenland, be it making Canada the 51st state, whether it be getting the Panama Canal back, whether it be Venezuela. So this is just the latest iteration in a problem which has been created by President Trump primarily. And what has happened is it's a wake-up call for Europe, for democracies, whether they be in India, Canada, other great democracies, Japan, Australia, that you can't count on the United States in terms of waging peace. But what you have to do is pull together a coalition of nations who have democratic values, have the values enshrined in the UN Charter against aggression, against imperialism, and try to restore a semblance of a rule of law which has largely kept the world from general war since World War II, but is weakening as we speak.
Right. Mr. Vikri, now as far as Trump's claims on Russia and China are concerned, the fact that he said if the US doesn't, Russia or China will, does that question get solved now with increased NATO presence in the Arctic?
Well, you know, the security issues are real. But what is happening is President Trump is using those as a smokescreen for aggrandizement in taking over Greenland, which he wants to do. It's not a question of an immediate need for the U.S. to have Greenland in order to deter Russia and China. Admittedly, there is a problem in regard particularly Russia, not so much China, in regard to aggression generally. Unfortunately, Putin's approach is sort of a mirror image of that of President Trump. Namely, he wants to restore the old Russian Empire, which became the Soviet Union, and his first step in that regard is in regard to trying to resubjugate Ukraine. But there is no immediate problem, and NATO is designed to play a role, a cooperative role, with Canada, with Greenland, all those countries who have interest in the Arctic, Norway, Sweden, Finland, in order to be able to keep peace and stability. But make no mistake about it, NATO cooperatively can provide this kind of security arrangement. And for the United States under President Trump to say we must have it and we alone can keep the peace and have security in the Arctic is just a smokescreen for the aggrandizement ambitions of President Trump.
Right. All right, Mr. Vikri, thank you very much for your comments. And now moving ahead, viewers, US President Donald Trump once again on Wednesday criticized Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey after the mayor said the city does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws. Trump warned in a Truth Social post that Frey was playing with fire and said his statement could be a serious violation of the law. Trump claimed he had previously had a very good conversation with Frey about the situation and reportedly spoke with the Minnesota governor as well. The backdrop to the dispute is a larger federal immigration enforcement effort in Minneapolis that has drawn national attention, including controversial shootings involving ICE and Border Patrol agents, protests and calls for federal agents to leave the city. Local officials, including Frey, have pushed back against what they see as excessive federal action and left-right political friction over immigration policy, with state and city leaders seeking a calmer, safer approach amid ongoing investigations into deadly encounters. Raymond Vickery, I request Mr. Vickery to join us back in the discussion here. Mr. Vickery, what we've seen recently is that Trump seems to have backtracked on his excessive deployments, and he says there's going to be little change, although not full withdrawal. So clearly there has been at least a small degree of reflection on part of Trump. But how do we see the consequences of the two fatal shootings in Minnesota?
Well, thanks very much for allowing me to comment on this. You know, this is a crisis of President Trump's own making. He has sought a confrontation over his immigration policies, feeling that his Make America Great Again base is rabidly in favor of his grandiose deportation schemes against immigrants, many of whom have been in the United States for some time, are taxpayers, and have raised families. They are not in any greater degree a threat in terms of the kinds of allegations which President Trump has been making about being criminals, about being refugees from insane asylums and so forth. And he thought, President Trump thought Minnesota was the ideal place to make this confrontation. One, because the governor there is a Democrat who was a vice presidential nominee and ran against him and J.D. Vance last time. And because there have been a fraud situation in regard to some of the Somali refugees who are in the community in Minnesota. So he thought that this was the ideal way to do it, and sent in ICE troops in order to do the kind of confrontation over immigrants that he wanted. The result has been the murders of two protesters. Now a congresswoman has been attacked, and he is backing off because all the polls show that this approach is not popular, and he has to reconnoiter in that regard. Make no mistake about it, there is no obligation under the United States Constitution for a mayor of a city to enforce immigration laws. That question has been considered by the Supreme Court of the United States, and constitutionally it is not required. And it is up to a mayor to make a decision as to how best to keep the peace and protect the citizens of his city. And if he chooses not to enforce federal immigration laws, that's well within constitutional rights. But President Trump does not want to go by the Constitution. What he wants to do is to go by a theory of a unitary presidency, which is tantamount to dictatorship. And that is the path that he is on, that he's pursuing. And they have backed off now because he sees disastrous political consequence for him, and he is perfectly capable of changing course, at least temporarily, to get where he wants to go.
Right, Mr. Vickery, but with the comments that have come in from Jacob Frey, what precedent is this really setting? in a conversation between federal authorities and local authorities?
Well, Mayor Fry is attempting to cooperate to restore peace and civility in his city. He does not see that enforcement of federal immigration laws is furthering that purpose, which is his job. So what is going on, of course, is that President Trump loves to have enemies. He loves to be able to portray those who disagree with him, who have a right to disagree with him, as somehow un-American, acting unconstitutionally. And what he's really saying is they're not doing what I want them to do, and I should be the ultimate power. That's not the system of democracy in the United States. We have a system of checks and balances. We have a 10th Amendment to the Constitution, which gives all rights not delegated to the federal government specifically are retained in the states, which means the cities as well. And that is our system. But make no mistake about it, President Trump is trying to change that system. I predict that he'll have great political kickback in terms of the midterms and from the judiciary, which he's already getting. And we will be able to move forward after 250 years of history of a democracy. But it's a very, very difficult time, and the jury is still out on what actually will happen.
Right. Mr. Vikri, thanks very much then for your comments. And now if you move ahead, viewers, let's also tell you that Hamas has announced it is ready to transfer full control of Gaza to the National Technocratic Government. This move comes as part of a ceasefire agreement with a newly formed National Committee for the Administration of Gaza set to oversee day-to-day governance. Hamas spokesman Hazem Qasim confirmed that all necessary preparations have been made, including the transfer of files and responsibilities across various sectors. He emphasized that the only remaining step is the committee's entry into Gaza to begin the handover process. Qasim also addressed the issue of border crossings, urging that they be opened fully in both directions without Israeli restrictions. He reiterated Hamas's commitment to the ceasefire and its role in securing Palestinian independence and self-determination. Let's hear those statements.
الآن لا يتحدث عن اشتراطات وعن تجهيزات، وهذا أيضا مخالف الاتفاق. يجب أن يتم فتح المعبر في كلا الاتجاهين بشكل كامل، حرية الخروج والدخول إلى قطاع غزة بشكل حقيقي دون أي إعاقات إسرائيلية. الآن إعلان اللجنة الوطنية المستقلة عن فتح معبر رفح هذا أمر مهم. الأهم أن نتابع هذه اللجنة عملية مغادرة ودخول المواطنين بكل حرية وفق الاتفاق، لا أن يكون وفق الاشتراطات الإسرائيلية. بالتأكيد حماس كقوة وطنية هي حاضرة في المشهد الفلسطيني لجهة استمرار النضال الوطني المشروع حتى نسترد حقنا كفلسطينيين بإقامة دولتنا الفلسطينية المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس، وأن ننتزع استقلالنا وتقرير المصير. هذه ملتزمة باتفاق وقف الحرب على قطاع غزة، نفذت كل ما هو مطلوب منها في المرحلة الأولى، وهي جاهزة للدخول في كل مسارات المرحلة الثانية انحيازا منا للمصلحة الوطنية ولأبناء شعبنا الفلسطيني، تطبيقا لاتفاق وقف إطلاق النار، سحبا للذرائع من الاحتلال سواء لاستئناف العدوان على قطاع غزة أو إعاقة الأعمار. لذلك
Alison Butler, former AP Bureau Chief, joins us now from Bucharest in Romania. Alison, thanks very much for joining us. Now, of course, the protocol for the proposal is all ready. Hamas has expressed its readiness as well. But how challenging do you think the execution of the plan is going to be?
Well, the original peace plan came out, I think, on October the 10th. We've already, several months since then. So obviously it's taken some time to even reach this stage. Now, this is a clear development that Hamas, after all these years, has agreed under the terms of this peace plan to hand over to the Palestinian Technocratic Committee that will run Palestine. But as you say, it's very hard after so many years of fighting and military action that things will go smoothly. The important thing for all the Palestinians, of course, is the reopening of this Rafah border with Egypt. It's Palestine's only border to another country apart from Israel.
Yeah.
But I do foresee problems because they have lived under such a regime of violence and terror for so many years, both with the Israeli action, but also the Hamas's action against its own civilians. So I think it's inevitable that we are going to see some problems. But it is a very important step that today, on January the 28th, they have agreed to hand over to this technocratic committee. And that is important because it won't be political. And the committee's aim is to, I think, restore ordinary, civilian life, to make things more normal for the people living there. And that's very important because the place has absolutely been blitzed to pieces. So it's an important step, but obviously it would be naive for us to think there won't be issues, there won't be roadblocks, there won't be problems.
All right, and Alison, given the fact that the committee is, of course, a US-backed, it's part of the broader Board of Peace plan. What really is next, and what kind of cooperation can we expect from either party?
I think it's very important that it's US-backed because obviously there's very little trust with Israel, and perhaps other Arab countries don't want to get involved. So having the US backing, I think, is very important, and the US did really fight for this, but obviously Donald Trump takes this very seriously, which is why he's established this Board of Peace, which is not just made from local actors, but also a lot of other state leaders and the countries have been invited to join. Whether they will or not is another matter. So it is important there is US backing here, but again, I think that there might be problems with implementing it because these things always, any ceasefire, any deal like this, there are always issues along the way.
Right. All right, Alison, do stay on with me as we proceed to another conversation. Moving ahead, viewers, let's also now tell you that Syria's al-Shara will be meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin. In fact, he's met them. The meeting comes as Moscow seeks to secure its military presence in Syria. Russia has been moving troops out of Qamishli in the northeast, leaving its main forces at Hmeimim Air Base and Tartus Naval Base on the Mediterranean. This is al-Shara's second visit to Moscow since he toppled longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad in 2024. Moscow has worked to rebuild ties with Damascus since Assad's fall, aiming to maintain influence in the Middle East. Meanwhile, al-Shara has reportedly pushed for extradition of Assad, who remains in Russia, but the Kremlin has not committed to that request. Let's listen in to the comments that the two leaders exchanged.
Мы очень рады видеть вас снова в Москве. За время нашей предыдущей встречи время не прошло даром. Многое сделано с точки зрения восстановления наших межгосударственных отношений. Удалось сдвинуть с мертвой точки и уровень взаимодействия в экономической сфере. 4 с лишним % роста, это может быть не так амбициозно, как бы нам хотелось, но все-таки движение заметное, и нужно обязательно сохранить эту замечательную тенденцию.
في هناك كثير مواضيع مشتركة بيننا وبينكم ونأمل أن نتباحث بها بتفاصيل كثيرة خلال هذا اللقاء المثمر. أعتقد أن سوريا خلال العام الماضي مضت خطوات كثيرة وتجاوزت مراحل وعقبات، وكان آخرها تحدي توحيد الأراضي السورية، وكانت مواقف سوريا خلال العام الماضي مؤيدة لوحدة الأراضي السورية، وسوريا لها دور تاريخي أيضا في سوريا في وحدة واستقرار ليس فقط سوريا وإنما الإقليم بأكمله، ونأمل أن تستمر هذه الجهود حتى تكون منطقة الشرق الأوسط في أفضل حال من الاستقرار والتنمية، وتنتقل من حالة الخراب والدمار إلى حالة الاستقرار والتنمية. شكرا لك سيد الرئيس.
All right, Alison continues to stay with us, requested to join us back. Alison, this really is a tough position for Russia, I believe, because it's meeting with al-Shara when Assad continues to remain in exile. How significant is really this meeting?
Yes, it's a very tricky situation for Russia, but Russia has every interest in welcoming al-Shara back after just a few months. He was there in October because it wants to keep a military presence in Syria. Now, as you said in your report before, there is some presence, but it is being reduced. But these are the only military outposts that Russia has outside the former Soviet Union. So it's very important for them to have this position on the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. So I think Putin or the Kremlin is playing both sides. He hasn't agreed, or the Kremlin hasn't agreed to extradite Assad. And I don't think that would be a decision taken very lightly. It's it's the power that Putin does retain. But I think that also Putin is quite happy. The Kremlin were quite concerned that when Assad fled to Russia, when his regime ended, that the al-Shara would be much more unfriendly, even hostile to Russia. And that hasn't been the case. Al-Shara has been quite pragmatic and wants to continue ties with Russia. Russia has traditionally had, back since the Soviet times, links to Syria. Is one of its areas of influence, one of its dwindling areas of influence. It's now lost Venezuela. So it is important, I think, for both sides. The Syrians, they do want, he does want, al-Shara does want Assad extradited. It's very unclear whether that will happen and when it will happen and how it will happen. But also, he wants to retain good traditional relations with the Kremlin. But also, Putin does want to keep a foothold in Syria to make his imprint on the world stage.
All right, Alison, thank you very much for joining me and for sharing your comments with us. And viewers, as always, let's wrap up with some technology news. Now, Spotify has announced that it paid over $11 billion to the music industry in 2025, marking the largest annual payout to music from any retailer in history. The Swedish streaming platform reported a 10% increase in payouts compared to the previous year, with independent artists and labels receiving half of all royalties. As competition from major players like YouTube and Apple intensifies, Spotify has focused on retaining and attracting new artists to its platform. YouTube, for a comparison, reported payouts of more than $8 billion to the music industry between July 2024 and June 2025. Spotify, which distributes nearly 70% of its music revenue to the industry, stated that as its revenue grows, so do its payouts. The company reinvests the money it retains into expanding various content formats such as podcasts, videos, and audiobooks. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World. For more news updates from around the world.